UFC 303 Alex Pereira versus Jiri Prochazka 2 took place last night, and there was a lot we learned from the card. So I'm going to go through my top 3 takeaways for UFC 303. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being my biggest takeaway from UFC 303. Starting off with my very first honorable mention, and that is that Dana White is trying to bully the media into changing the pound-for-pound rankings to put Jon Jones as number 1 before he announces Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Now, I did an entire video on this, so I'm not going to spend too much time. Plus, it's an honorable mention. Plus, it really doesn't have to do with the card itself, really the post-fight presser. But check out that video. I highly encourage you. But the gist of it is Dana is complaining nonstop at the 303 presser, whining and crying that Jon Jones is pound-for-pound number 1. He has 2 German Shepherds. He shoots guns. He smacks spray paint cans out of teenagers' hands in the city, and he's a vigilante, and he doesn't have the best nutritionist. All this bullcrap, all because he's sickened that he can't promote pound for pound number 1 Jon Jones versus the GOAT heavyweight Stipe Miocic, and the media better not bend to his will. But I highly encourage you to check out that video. I'm not going to talk too much more about it. Next honorable mention, and that is that Payton Talbot can be a star in the bantamweight division. I think it's a bit early. I think people are overhyping him quite a bit, but I'm liking Payton Talbot as a prospect. 9-0, went out there and absolutely starched Yanis Gamori. And I know Yanis Gamori isn't that good, but before that, absolutely dominated Cameron Simon. Before that, beat Nick Aguirre. Got out grappled in the first round, fair enough, which isn't a good look, and his grappling is definitely his weakness. But he calls out Adrian Yanez. I think that's a great call out to kind of get close to the top 15, and I think it's a favorable matchup for him. And I think he's got a unique enough personality where people kind of latch onto him a little bit. He's got a very exciting fight style, and he's a finisher. This guy's a finisher. 7 wins by KO, 1 via submission, and 1 via decision. Of his 9 wins, he's undefeated. I think he's a very interesting prospect in the bantamweight division, and he's only 25 years old. So I'm very curious to see where he goes from here. If he fights Yanez and beats Yanez, and let's say he beats him impressively, which my mind's immediately flashing back to Yanez getting KO'd by Rob Font, I'm like, you know what? I think Talbot probably beats Yanez. So that propels Talbot probably to a top 15 opponent. And then we start to get really interesting matchups for Talbot, and I think the UFC really wants to push Talbot. And I think Talbot's confident in his abilities. I think he'll get babied a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be like the Bo Nickel treatment where he's fighting bomb after bomb after bomb. I mean, Cameron Simon in your second fight is actually a steep test, in my opinion. For an unranked guy, Cameron Simon is a really good fighter. So Payton Talbot, if he keeps winning impressively, has an interesting personality, I think he could be a star in the sport. Next honorable mention, and this is another video I'm going to do, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it as well, but that is that Conor McGregor may never fight again, and Michael Chandler is a complete idiot for waiting for Conor McGregor. Even if he does get the fight, it's such an unknown right now. There's interviews that Chandler's done. There's some moments at the press conference, Dana White talking about Chandler waiting and saying, I don't advise him to wait. And it's just, you look at 303, it was a massive catastrophe and massive cluster just because Conor McGregor was unreliable. You know, and I know people are going to say, he was injured, Joey. He was injured. Fair enough, he broke his pinky toe. Do you know, I know he's gotten some hate, but do you know the level of hate that any other fighter would have gotten if they pulled out of a big fight with a pinky toe? And it's not even for a title. I don't blame Conor for pulling out. But I'm saying, who knows how he even broke that pinky toe? He says he broke it in sparring. It wouldn't shock me. This is pure speculation. This is not fact. It wouldn't shock me if he was drunk and stubbed his toe on a corner table when he's walking around drunk on his yacht. It wouldn't shock me if he's trying to take someone to the NBA Finals public restroom and he bangs his toe on a urinal or something along those lines. So he's out there drinking. Now that he's injured, you see him out partying. He's going to party for his birthday. McGregor's a clown if he sits out and waits for this guy. He needs to move on and move on fast. And even if he moves on, he can still get the McGregor fight down the line. Let's say he fights someone in a month or 2. I'm sure the UFC would oblige him and give him a fight. And that'd be a big fight. And win or lose, he can still fight McGregor when he eventually comes back. Maybe. in December, November, or, even January, February of next year. Now, I still believe that Conor most likely never fights again in the UFC. Probably he's looking to use his sunset clause, but we don't know that for sure. So, but sitting out, waiting on him and praying that you're going to get that fight just because maybe his baby toe heals, I wouldn't trust that at all. Last honorable mention, and this one pains me to say. This one truly pains me to say, and that's Jiri Prochazka's career may be over. I know that sounds a bit hyperbolic, but he now has 2 KO losses to the champion. Pereira's now chinned him twice. His chin could be gone. And on top of that, he's not getting a title shot as long as Pereira's champ. Now, that could change. Who knows? Ankalaev could beat him. Pereira's 37 soon. He could be disappearing from the sport, going up to heavyweight, whatever it may be. But, man, looking back at Yuri's career, and he's one of my favorite fighters. The resume isn't looking great, to be quite honest. And I know hindsight's 20/20, but we've always kind of said this. Yuri, his style is predicated on his wildness and his ability to take a shot. He's kind of like a more striking, dominant Tony Ferguson at lightweight. And now his chin's been just touched up twice. I mean, you look back at the fight against Alexander Rakic. Rakic is beating the piss out of him. Yuri comes back just by sheer will and determination. The Glover Teixeira fight, he's losing. Comes back and wins in the 5th round against an exhausted Glover Teixeira. Probably going to lose a decision there. Before that, Dominic Reyes. And went to war with Dominic Reyes, arguably. Before that, Volkan Ozdemir was losing. That was his UFC debut. So at this point, he's got 4 UFC wins. And in a lot of them, none of them were dominant wins. I mean, I guess you could maybe say the Reyes win, but not really. I mean, I remember that fight being super dominant or super competitive and not dominant at all, even though he got the finish. But I haven't rewatched that fight recently. I've only seen bits and pieces of it. But he got chinned by Pereira. He's not fighting Pereira. He's not getting the trilogy, and he took it on short notice. And now his chin may be gone. I mean, he didn't even put his hands up when that head kick came in the second round because he was hurt so badly from the left hook at the end of the first. So as much as it pains me to say, I don't think Yuri will ever be champ again. He's not going to get a title shot for a while. And it just sucks, man. Yuri's one of my favorite fighters. And I'm super disappointed. And it sucks that, if Pereira chinned him on a full camp, fair enough. And I'd be saying the same thing for Pereira if Yuri would have chinned him. I know people are going to say, you hate Pereira. If he got chinned on a full camp, fair enough. He got an opportunity. He was fully prepared. But to come in on 2 weeks' notice and get chinned and now your championship hopes are done, seeing Yuri about to cry in the octagon really broke my heart. So it's sad to say, but it's an honorable mention because I'm not 100% confident on it because he is young and Pereira's old and maybe his chin's all right and light heavyweight isn't that great of a weight class. But now I'm thinking about it. Like if Jan isn't completely washed up, Jan Blachowicz, there's talk of that matchup. Jan Blachowicz is probably going to chin him. But Jan is old, so he's probably kind of slowing down a bit more. So maybe Yuri can get the win. But I'm just looking at a lot of these guys. Magomed Ankalaev is chinning Yuri, boys. If he fights Yuri, he's chinning him. So I'm just scared that his career's over. Moving on to my actual list. Starting off with my 3rd honorable mention. And that is that Diego Lopez versus Dan Eay meant absolutely nothing. I can't take anything away from it. Nothing of note from that fight. It meant literally nothing. And also, the commission doesn't give a rat's ass about the fighters. I know everyone's like, oh, it was cool to see him step in on a couple hours notice. For those of you who don't know, it was supposed to be Brian Ortega, Diego Lopez, and Brian Ortega pulls out the night of. Dan Eay steps in. He's supposed to fight 2-3 weeks from now. The commission allows it. And I know people are going to say, Joey, apparently he had his medicals for the upcoming fight, and apparently he was training for a fight, and he's ranked in the top 15. Listen, how is this fair to Diego Lopez? Oh, Diego's artificially gaining weight so that the weight class is close. They did a catch weight of 165 pounds. How is this fair that Diego Lopez is weighing in at 145 to be woken up in the middle of the night, early morning? Hey, weigh 155. Because guess what? If Diego comes in at 145, I think there's a certain poundage that if it's off, the fight's off. You can't be that much of a discrepancy. So he's artificially gaining weight or he's putting the weight back on that he's already cut, which I get they do it anyway. But now he's doing that once for 155. Then now he's getting a call for 165 on the day of. What? How does that even make sense? Did Diego even weigh in again? I don't even know. But it makes absolutely no sense. And it's a meaningless fight. And honestly, I don't know how, a lot of you guys feel about it. I feel like Diego Lopez kind of lost a little bit of heat on his name because of this, because he got dominated in the 3rd round. This is a 5-round fight he's losing. He wasn't prepared for Dan Eay. And Diego Lopez took this fight on 2 weeks' notice himself against Brian Ortega. It makes literally no sense. And I know some people are like, Joey, I just want to see great fights. And I agree, I want to see great fights. But like, Diego Lopez went from fighting Brian Ortega on 2 weeks' notice to then fighting at lightweight against Brian Ortega on like 48 hours notice to fighting Dan Eay at 165 on 2 hours notice. So it's the worst possible scenario for Diego Lopez. I know nothing more about him than I knew before, so I just wish the fight didn't happen, to be quite honest. Dan Eay came out and made a name for himself, willing to take a fight on 2 hours notice. So shout out to Dan Eay, but still, we don't even know. Dan Eay could have won that fight on a full camp. Dan Eay, almost said Diego. Dan Eay could have won that fight if he had a full camp. So there's just nothing, there's no real information to take from the fight, and it's annoying me because now Diego Lopez apparently is going to get a highly ranked matchup. I would have loved to have some more information on Diego Lopez to kind of assess his career and his ascend to the top of the division, but now it's like, oh, what does it really mean? It means absolutely nothing for either guy. I would love to see it rebooked. They both said they want to fight on the Sphere. Rebook that same matchup. I know Diego Lopez wants a bigger matchup. He had the Ortega matchup in his grasp. I'd love to see them fight on a full camp. Would love to see that. Would love to see that as like a fight night main event. Lopez versus Eay would be a banger, but ultimately we got nothing from the co-main event of UFC 303. Next up on the list, my number 2 takeaway from UFC 303, and a lot of people aren't going to like hearing this, but Ian Machado Garry is an absolute savage, and he is exactly the type of fighter I want as a champion. Now, hear me out. Before you click off, before you go, I'm disliking this video, before I'm jumping down in the comment section trying to tear my head off, hear me out. Forget about what you think about the performance. I understand the performance wasn't crazy exciting. I understand the performance wasn't crazy dominant. I understand it wasn't crazy flashy. But just hear me out. I am so sick and tired of fighters squatting on their rankings. They get ranked and they're like, I'm not fighting anyone behind me. I'm not fighting anyone behind me. Guess what? Garry said, you know what? I wanted a bigger fight. I wanted Colby. I wanted Usman. I wanted Shavkat. I wanted one of those top-ranked guys ahead of me. I'll defend my ranking. I'll defend my number 6, number 7 ranking against number 14, MVP, who's a dangerous striker. And he went out there and beat him. And then what did he do afterwards? He got on the mic and said, give me Shavkat Rakhmonov, the boogeyman of the division. Nobody wants to fight Shavkat. Colby would rather go get 3 root canals than even mention Shavkat's name. Usman doesn't want Shavkat. Nobody wants to fight Shavkat. JDM did, so shout out to JDM. He's a savage too. So to go out there, defend your ranking against a dangerous matchup who doesn't really do anything for you, it's really a lose-lose situation, because if you win and you don't win super impressively, then you're a bum now. Oh, MVP has no grappling, and Garry didn't even finish him, and he got clipped up in the 2nd round. And if you do beat him, it's like, oh, well, that doesn't do anything for him. I think he's overhyped. I think he's over, whatever. He defended his ranking against a dangerous matchup way behind him in the rankings. And now he's calling out the most dangerous, scared, feared fighter in the division in Shavkat Rakhmonov. Not to mention, on top of all that, Ian Machado Garry is active. I mean, look at this. This activity. Fought in February. Fought in June. So he fought in June, obviously the other day, or yesterday. Fought in February. Fought in August of last year. Fought in May of last year. Fought in March of last year. Fought in July of the previous year. Fought in April of the previous year. Fought in November of the year before that. So this man is active, willing to take on all comers, willing to defend his rank, and willing to fight the boogeyman of the division. That's what I want. I'm so tired of these people picking and choosing fights. And I get it. He's singling out Shavkat, and he wants Colby too, apparently still too. But when you have guys that are like, I don't want to fight him, he doesn't do nothing for my career, and the rankings cause this massive hindrance. I love fighters that are willing to stay active, that are willing to take on all comers, and they're not hiding behind the number next to their name, which I'm sick of, and I think a lot of fans would agree. And I think Gary's one of the most overhated fighters on the roster. People are like, and I said overhated, not overrated, because people are now like, Gary's so overrated. The people saying Gary's overrated are the same people that picked MVP to beat him. They're the same people that picked Jeff Neal to beat him. They're the same people that probably picked Neil Magny to beat him. Now, I'm not going to go that far. I don't know for sure. But most people were picking Jeff Neal and Michael Venom Page to beat Garry, at least from what I've seen. So he goes out there and beats both those guys, as underwhelming as it may be, and now he's overrated. Well, wait a second. You said he was going to lose to those guys. So you were underrating him. So let's see him against Shavkat. I love that he's calling out Shavkat. I love that matchup for him. I want to see it. Book it on a pay-per-view ASAP. And guess what? Gary's going to take that fight before the end of the year. He's not going to sit around and do nothing. He's going to take that fight for the end of the year. I would love to see Ian Machado Garry as a champion. I would love to see him fight for a title. And I would love to have him as a champion because, I'm president of the Ian Machado Garry fan club because I love guys who are active and not scared to take on the toughest matchups in the division. And he's super promotable too. I know people are like, he's got cringy trash talk. Fair enough. If you don't like his trash talk, I get it. I'm not a big fan of it either. But 15-0 and what he's doing right now in the division, I think is great. And I would love to see him fight Shavkat. And if he defeats Shavkat, I don't want to hear any more excuses. I don't want to hear that he's not good. I don't want to hear that he's overrated. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear that. If he beats Shavkat, he needs to get a title shot. Moving on to my number one takeaway from UFC 303, and that is the only way to beat Alex Pereira at light heavyweight is to wrestle him. You need to grapple Alex Pereira, and it needs to be your only game plan. It needs to be your only game plan. And by the way, also, kind of like there's like 8 takeaways about Alex Pereira. He's an absolute savage. Absolute savage. Imagine, I bet you if you asked, let's say the situation was identical to the Pereira situation. Okay, so every champion that you ask is in the same situation as Pereira. If you ask every single champion on the roster to defend their belt on 2 weeks' notice, I think every single one of them is saying no. I'm looking at the champions right now. You think Pantoja's doing that? Hell no. You think O'Malley's doing that? Hell no. You think Toporia's doing that? Hell no. You think Makshev's doing that? Hell no. You think Leon Edwards is doing that? Hell no. You think Duplessis doing that? No. Pereira's the only guy to do it. Jones isn't doing it. Nobody's doing it. Pereira is the only guy that would step up on 2 weeks' notice and defend his title. Absolute savage. But these guys have to grapple him. And I know it's easier said than done. And, some people have mixed it in a little bit. But if you're going to go out there and just stand with this guy, he's going to KO you. He's literally one of the best strikers of all time in the UFC. And you're just going to stand there with your hands at your waist? No. And here's another takeaway. The only fight to make right now is Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev. That's another part of this number one. So Pereira needs to be out-grappled if you want to defend. If you want to beat him in the light heavyweight division, that is the only way to beat him, in my opinion. At least mix it in heavily. He's a savage for defending his title on 2 weeks' notice. Nobody else would do that. And lastly, the only fight to make is the Magomed Ankalaev fight. He doesn't need to move to heavyweight. He's going to get ragdolled by Tom Aspinall. He get ragdolled by John Jones. Also, the timeline really doesn't jive up. But I love Alex Pereira. And it's funny because I know people are going to call me crazy comparing him to Garry a little bit, but they are on the same card. And I just mentioned some of these same things. Pereira, ready to fight any and all comers and super active. And he goes out there and always puts on a performance. So I know that's not the same as Garry there, but the thing that I'm talking about is the activity and the willing to take on all comers. He says, look, sure, I'll take on Magomed Ankalaev. Sure, I'll move up to heavyweight. It's a different mentality because Pereira is so confident. He's been around forever and he's ready to go and he's been so active. I mean, he saved 303. People don't realize it, but him and Jamal Hill took the 300 main event on short notice. He saved UFC 295. They weren't the original main event. He went out there against Jan Blachowicz on a relatively quick turnaround after getting flatline KO'd by Israel Adesanya. I mean, this guy is a savage, and he has an amazing UFC career. If he defends the belt 2 more times, I'd like to see him defend the belt 2 more times, like against Magomed Ankalaev, and then maybe one more fight. I don't know against who right now. There's somebody yet to be named in the division kind of to make their way up. But if he defends against Magomed Ankalaev, defends against one more, maybe he beats up Jamal Hill again after Jamal Hill gets a win or 2, then he can go up to heavyweight. Fight whoever's the champion then. Be your swan song when you're 39, 40 years old and you're getting ready to get out of MMA in general. But right now, the only fight to make is the Magomed Ankalaev fight. But Pereira is a complete and utter savage. There's nobody else. And he had broken toes, and he hurt his toes with the head kick too. Nobody else would ever defend their belt on 2 weeks' notice. It would never happen, and Pereira did that. He deserves all the credit in the world. And he went out there against Jiri Prochazka, who was a madman, who was a savage. And he went out there and arguably ended Jiri Prochazka's career. What an event. It wasn't all that great, to be quite honest. I did an entire post-fight on it. You can go check it out. But the main event definitely delivered. The rest of the card was Prelims were decent. Main card really wasn't that great. But what an event that the UFC scrambled together for on 2 weeks' notice after Conor McGregor pulled out with a pinky toe. Let me know what you guys think of my takeaways down in the comments. Did I miss anything? Do you disagree? Do you agree with any of them? Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.